Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Aspiring Non-Executive Directors event. This is the first of what we hope will be a series. We'd love to hear your thoughts after this session. If you want to hear more, if you've got other people you could recommend who could come and speak to us, we would love to do a series of these events for a new community that we're hoping to start called the Aspiring Non-Executive Directors community. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Abby and I work with Barry Cranford. He is the founder of ANEDs for short. We are the communities that we run. We are RecWorks. We're a tech recruitment company with a massive difference. As a company, we believe that recruitment really can be a force for good in the industry beyond just placing people in jobs. We have a particular focus on learning, mentoring, and personal development. If people want to learn and others want to teach or share their knowledge, we are happy to connect you through our communities and events. We see this as giving back to those we've worked with in the past, but also paying it forward to those we hope to work with in the future. To date, we have 15 tech communities that we run. They're all completely free for our members. We have run over 700 events for engineers, developers, students, graduates, CTOs. We have run conferences, lightning talks, hackathons, panel events like today. In January this year, we actually made our 4,000th introduction through our Meet a Mentor program. Again, that's a completely free community that we run. We're really excited to see where that's going next as well. As I've already said, we love to give opportunities for people to connect, and this event is part of that. If you want to know more about any of our other communities, please do get in touch with myself or Barry or Jade. However you heard about this event, we'll be able to get you directed to the right place to find out about our other communities. As we go through today's event, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just ping me a message and say, I'd like to ask a question, and then when there's a space, unmute and ask it yourself. That's absolutely fine. We're more than happy to have this as quite a kind of discussion-based event. So do just ping me a message if you want to unmute and ask yourself, or put the question in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that throughout the event. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our wonderful panel who've agreed to be with us today to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into the main reason for this event and why you're all here. So I'll start with Simon. Could you just introduce yourself for us, please?
I certainly can. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Simon Dodd. I've spent 30 plus years, man and boy, working in the world of brand marketing communications, and then that got me into general management. In the last 7 or 8 years, I've enjoyed building a portfolio of work, which is a mixture of non-exec director roles, mentoring and project work, and a small amount of executive work. And I'm currently a non-exec director of a large animation and visual effects company.
Fantastic, thank you. Next up, Naomi, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon, I'm Naomi Scott-Mackey from First Flight Non-Executive Directors, and as our name suggests, we are a search consultancy providing non-executives. So Simon has been one of our candidates and still is, and that's really our job, is to provide non-exec directors across every type of business, anything from a small private business, a charity, right through to PLCs.
Fantastic. Next we have Paul. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Paul Jackaman. Afternoon, everybody. I've spent 25 years in banking and commodities. I've moved around the world a bit. I've worked in New York and Japan, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong. Back in London now. I finished up as a CFO of a listed company based in Singapore and Hong Kong. And since I've got back to the UK, I've been doing a little bit of non-exec work down in South Africa mainly. I would probably say I've had more experience of boards from the exec side than the non-exec side, but more recently on the non-exec side.
Excellent. And last but not least, James.
Thank you. Afternoon all. So James Harley. I've similar to Naomi in some respects. I've been recruitment, talent acquisition my whole career. I went in-house, first went in-house in 2009 when I was then living in Hong Kong. And I've been in-house running talent acquisition solutions for businesses, both region, multi-region and globally since then. My experience is probably more actually on hiring non-exec directors for businesses. The mainstay of that has been because there has been a legal requirement from certainly in the banking industry, compliance legal requirement to have non-exec directors. But I'm also a non-exec director for a small boutique search firm that specialises in cybersecurity risk, threat intelligence, and so on. And so, yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic, thank you. So you can already tell everybody we've got a great wealth of knowledge and expertise with us today. So I'm really excited to start us off. So just for anyone who doesn't know, could one of you please explain to us, give us a quick introduction to what an NED is and who would typically hire them?
I can answer that if you would like.
Go for it, thank you.
So a non-exec director is exactly as it says, someone who works within the board alongside the executive directors, but they are there to as oversight really in terms of the business and the company. And in a PLC situation, that's obviously around corporate governance regulations. And so PLCs are required to have independent non-execs in the board. If you look at it from a private company's point of view, they might take that slightly differently. But at the end of the day, what we consider to be the best advantage of having non-execs involved in your business, or becoming the reason to become a non-exec, is that you're providing your skills and experience. And inevitably, that's probably around company growth.
Excellent. So how does the relationship then between the board of a company and an NED work? What does that look like?
We're all being very polite, aren't we? Let me crack in there, and I think actually Paul and James will have a different view on it, because my world, the world I've worked in, is, as I said, sort of creative industries, and that tends to be majority are private companies and their owner driver companies. And the description is exactly as Naomi says, but I think when you're working in smaller owner-driven businesses, you tend to find, I find that although you're on the board and you're there to advise and support, and I would think also to add energy, because sometimes owner-driven businesses can get very tired. When you've got certain, 3 or 4 people who have been metaphorically gripping the steering wheel tightly for years, driving their company, they get tired. They get tired of gripping the wheel, and they get tired of each other, to be honest, at times. And sometimes you're there to add stimulus and to actually just try and re-energize things. And I think, I was in a board meeting with my non-exec yesterday, and we do the formal part of it, and we do the board, and we do the agenda and all the rest of it absolutely fine. But an awful lot of what we do, there's an informal part, which is kind of giving support, advice, some enthusiasm, and also some tough love at times, in often quite big, quite macro and quite micro moments within the company. And I'll say more later, but it's really good fun, but it's a juggle between being supportive but still trying to be independent as well. So you're in the business but you're out of the business. That's the whole. So you keep your objectivity and your independence, and that's it. That's very good fun, but sometimes quite hard to do because you get dragged into things.
Yeah, Simon, I concur with that. I think treading a line between, you're there for your independence, you're there for your experience, and sometimes the way I think about it is being a critical friend to the board and the execs. You're not just there to just be endlessly encouraging and optimistic. I mean, that is part of your job, but you've also got to be able to identify and help them see pitfalls along the way, where they might be going off. I think, for me, particularly with my background as a finance guy, where I've found I've been able to help is helping them think about the finance, the cash flow side of things in particular. Typically if you're talking to the owner of a business, he's got great ideas, but he's not run a business. Running a business is not the same thing as making a success of whatever your idea is. So I found helping them to think about things a certain way, I think is useful. I think having a real keen eye on the governance and having a good idea, you know, for my sins, for better or worse, I've seen boards working well and boards that haven't worked well, and it's taught me a lot about how things go wrong and when they go wrong, and the warning signs. And actually, a lot of those warning signs can come from a board that isn't challenging enough, that becomes too comfortable in what it's doing and gets too comfortable with management, and isn't, you know, that line between, you know, working with them and actually being that on that critical friend path and being able to call them out when things aren't going right becomes blurred. And I think the other part of it as well, I'd add, is again, specifically from a finance point of view, and to the growth point, when you're talking about being on board for growth, if you're going to grow, you're going to need bank support, you're going to need funding typically. And how do you go and talk to these organizations in their language, so that, you know, you can present your business in a way that they will understand, which then helps them, you know, that will help them to help you, because if you can present to them in a way that they need to go and present internally to credit committees or whatever, it can make a huge difference to how he comes across. Businesses typically, it's not the fundamentals of the business that will trip them up. It will be the cash flow, it will be liquidity, it will be supply chain, it will be all the stuff that you're not really thinking about when you've got a world that's you've got an idea that you think is going to change the world, and it might, but, you know, you've got to be able to get it to market, it's got to make money, you've got to see those things come.
I think you raised a good point there, Paul, but so did you, Simon, in terms of, for me, what was really important, and we didn't realize it too late, but we certainly didn't go into it with the view that we should be thinking about these things, was really define what they felt they needed and what I felt they needed. So defining your role, and it varies enormously in my experience, not just from what I've seen as a non-exec director, but also the people that I've hired as non-exec directors for various different firms. One was a gambling company, one's been, you know, two have been within two of the big global banks. And that definition, I think, is really important, and is what it is. Your point, Paul, around I found myself that I was actually the only one that was asking the really difficult questions, because there was no, you know, you take the route of least resistance, and I think to your point, Simon, the owner driver, it's like you can very easily become sort of tunnel vision. And actually, so one of the roles that, or one of the parts that I played was that I because I'm somewhat detached, you can think more holistically, and you don't necessarily see the preconceptions or the minor issues that might be a stumbling block for someone that is tunnel vision in a particular direction. And so, as it happened, it was around how you position your business to your customers. It was introductions. I mean, there was, you know, it was as blatant as that. In terms of the mechanics in how we identified candidates, because this was an executive search firm that I'm referring to, that was their business. They were experts at doing that, and they didn't need my help on that. But in terms of how they define their proposition to their clients, how they position themselves uniquely to them, being that I've been the customer of a number of these search firms in the past, there was that add value. And I think if I had my time again, I would define that from the get-go, define that much earlier in the process, rather than kind of feeling your way through it. As it turns out, we did that and it's worked out fine, but I can imagine instances where it hasn't, and that can be problematic.
Fantastic. So an NED is, as you've already said, like a friend that is impartial, that works alongside the business, but sometimes has, like you say, that different viewpoint to necessarily the ideas person of the business, so that you can get everything working together. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
I'm going very simple terms here. I'm sure everybody else understands as well, but I'm just making sure I understand too, because it's really fascinating for me to find out things like this as well. So you've kind of touched on it a little bit, I think, across your answers, everyone, but what have you found that an NED can bring to a business as opposed to, so I guess, a comparison really between a business that's got an NED and a business that hasn't. What are the kind of advantages of having the NED there?
Gosh, at the start, I mean, you're bringing another point of view. You're bringing experience, which is often related, but also is very good when it's not related, where actually it can deliberately challenge because you're seeing things very different to them. I think you bring that rigor from elsewhere. And I'll go back to the point, and maybe it's more because of the world I live in, that kind of energy. People in the creative industries, I mean, Paul's absolutely right. You get that, the ideas people, but it's a well-known sort of cliche that creative people very rarely run very good businesses. They're not naturally good business people. They're full of ideas, energy, bravery, and insight, but they don't know how to run the business. At the same time, if you put in place people who are very hardcore business people, they're detached. I think the right non-exec kind of sits between, in my situation, I sit in both. I know what they're talking about. I know where their heads are, but I've run some reasonably large companies, and I can bring that experience and that detachment to help them, but in their language.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that there's I think the governance point is really important. It's making sure that the management of the company are thinking about things the right way and going through the right processes in the right way. I think even to a point of just, the formal presentations for whatever it might be at a board meeting. It might be an audit committee, it might be a risk committee, it might be just a meeting to discuss the next idea. But I think that kind of experience that you can impart is critical, and a different way of, as Simon said, a different way of thinking about things. I think, if you're under at the coalface every single day and you're living and breathing this stuff, then I think a NED has got a really good, important role to play to help them step away from that and look at it fresh and represent it. And then it's your job as the NED to question it, to critique it, and to come at it with a fresh set of eyes. Navigating that line between being an exec and a non-exec is really important. You shouldn't be getting too bogged down in the detail and the minutiae of the business. And that's something personally I find a challenge. I've spent the vast majority of my career on the exec side, where you are living and breathing it, where you are responsible for the day-to-day. As a non-exec, you're absolutely not. And if you find yourself going down that rabbit hole too much, you are not going to be as effective as a non-exec as you could be. So it's important that you understand, not just what your role is, but the most effective way that you can execute it.
I think your question, Abbi, around, what's the benefits of having an NED and not, in addition to the things that Paul and Simon have mentioned there, this is also, I find it also as almost a mentoring relationship with the leader of this business, and I have no, my agenda is fairly impartial. I want the business to succeed. There aren't conflicts of interest, so it enables you to be quite an impartial, and I'm not driving a particular agenda other than you want the business to succeed, and on the basis of that, there can be some tough love. You've got someone that can also be a thought partner. And I think that's probably the biggest role I've played in it, is actually this person being able to detach themselves from the day-to-day running of the business and actually say, okay, are we actually heading in the right direction? Is this the types of things that we should be approaching? How should we be approaching them? And I think that's, I found it's naturally sort of morphed into a mentoring relationship as much as anything, really.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that mentoring, especially again in small private companies, particularly, I think trying to keep relationships between people who know each other very well and very close, and perhaps are too close, refereeing slightly, yes, but also I spend time deliberately in the board situation, but also outside a little bit of time with each of the board members, because I want to make sure they come into the boardroom in good form. So actually, you have a really good board meeting rather than they come in detached, or they bring in rubbish from elsewhere. And I think that's part of the job, to make sure that board process is not just efficient, but actually really is productive. And also, to be honest, it's fun to do, it's positive to do, rather than it being arduous. which I think some people do find, they don't look forward to the board meeting. They find it ominous and a bit turgid, when in fact it should be an exciting gathering of thoughts and updates on where we are, decision making, stuff like that. I mean, it should be epicenter of stuff.
Yeah, I think something else that's interesting is the different stakeholders you have in the room. Simon, in particular, I think you might have a view on that. But it's, you'll always have, you're going to have shareholders. You've got management. You've got the execs. You've got lots of different people. You've got the debt holders. You've got shareholders. You've got owners. Different people. They have different priorities, and depending on where the company is and how it's doing and the position it's in, you're going to have the priorities and of the stakeholders changes over time. And I think that's a critical area where a non-exec can really step back and provide advice around, okay, who should you be thinking about? Like in a company that's growing really well and doing great and growing, and it's all about the owners and the equity. If the company's not doing so well, you've got to be thinking about, well, okay, does it become the creditors rather than the equity? And how does that, when does that change? And how do you go through the governance of deciding that that's changed? And then what do you do if you've reached that conclusion? And that's, a lot of that is about protection for the company and for management as well. The company is a different entity to the owners, to the directors, the guys who run it, right? They're not necessarily the same thing and have the same priorities. And you can see that change over time. And I think having the experience as a non-exec to kind of be able to think about those scenarios is actually really important. It certainly has been in my experience.
Yeah, what's it?
Excellent. So moving on now to the main reason for this event, how to actually win your first NED appointment. Obviously, we have a number of people in our audience today just looking to do that. So I'd love to hear from you how you would recommend getting your first NED appointment. How do you go about doing that? Can you draw on some personal experience to help us with that one?
For me, it was purely network based. But also a clear view in my mind of where I could add value and where I thought I would add value, and that really sort of targeted it. And it was part of my network. It was someone had reached out for some advice and said, look, this is something I'm thinking about doing. And they'd launched the business. They were about 6 months old at the time. And it sort of just morphed into that. It was around, as I say, it's sort of professional connection, and immediately I could kind of sit back and think, actually, this is where I could add value to this, and that's really how it happened. I mean, Naomi will have a strong view on this and has plenty of experience in this, but that's for me how it transpired from my perspective.
I would just say, and obviously I'm slightly sitting on the other side of the fence, not being a non-exec, but obviously meeting lots of people who either are or would like to be, and it's a very personal journey for everybody. Like anything, some people come from a private background, a PLC background, a non-profit background, and I think probably the way to consider it is that once you've decided it's something that you would like to do, then to start making an approach towards it. James very correctly points out that network is so important, and once you've decided you think you might not want a non-exec role, you should tell everybody, especially anyone you know who's a non-exec already, because inevitably they'll be sitting with other non-execs on boards who will be members of other boards, and still the network is probably the most likely place to bring you an opportunity. I know that from the way that we work and around advertising our roles is that you just don't see enough non-exec roles advertised out there in a public arena. That doesn't mean there aren't any, and it won't take you very long once you start your journey to see who you can work with, who will allow you to sign up with them without any charge, and how to approach that. And I would say you just want to be on top of that as much as you possibly can. And just think very carefully, as James pointed out, what are your skills? What is your sector? And absolutely position yourself, with your best foot forward. We can have roles if they're paid roles, up to over 100 people applying for them. So it can be a very competitive market in order, to find a role, but not to be disheartened, to put yourself out there, don't get too bogged down in what does my CV look like. Have a little think about, if you were going to hire in that company a non-exec, what would you be looking for and what are the skills that you need? But I would just say, I think board language is very important. You don't necessarily have had to have been a board member to be a board member in the long run, because you might be bringing some outside skills that that company couldn't possibly take on full time. But do sort of, there's lots and lots of information out there, you know, do think about things like strategy, a little bit about governance. You know, people are looking at risk. Paul is very correct in talking about, you know, financial viewpoint. Everyone needs to understand the P&L. That's really important. And if you're bringing some contacts and things, then that probably pushes you a bit further up the chances of securing something, but not to be put off, and just to bear in mind that you might do 2 or 3 interviews before you get that opportunity. I've had incredibly well-placed execs that have come to part of our network, and it's taken them a year or more to land on, you know, into our company that really suits them. So it's a bit of a journey, and they don't put a time limit on it, but if you want to do it, you've got to get out there and give it a try, really.
I'd add, I think that's all true. Interesting echo. What I'd also add, though, it is a bit of a journey, and there's a lot of chemistry in this. So you could be right on paper, right background, you've got right network, but again, sorry, how can I speak from my own experience? Smallish businesses, still privately owned, the people who are on the board who actually own the business, quite rightly, are incredibly fussy, and it gets quite personal. So they might think 3 or 4 people can do the job without a doubt, but there's just something about a personality or an offhand comment, and that's so subjective that I think it's really important that people realise it doesn't mean you're not good enough, or you're not the right person to do the job. It's something sometimes out of the individual's control that can just go, right, it's going to be that person, not that person. And so, you know, my father used to say to me, you know, about kissing lots of frogs. You have got to go out and do lots of that, and it could be great, but it might not just be right. It doesn't mean it isn't going to be right at some point. It gets very personal at some point. The other thing I would add as well, yes, I think you can go and aim for it. I think also I found my first role kind of came to me because I was mentoring. I was actually using my background to help someone run a company, and mentoring and helping them. And the mentoring got so frequent, and I got involved in so many other things. It became a sort of, so why don't we do this a bit more formally? And why don't you come and sit in the board and actually try to help us, because you're involved in lots of areas, which is lovely. And so I kind of not fell into it, but it became almost logical to have a more formal, ongoing role rather than just mentoring, and that worked for me. My first role.
Wonderful. That's so cool that you can start off with doing one kind of aspect of an NED role, and then actually it turns into one is very good. But I love what you've all said so far, actually, you know, that if you want to pursue an NED role, just start looking, and there will be opportunities coming up. But like Naomi said, you know, don't put a time limit on it, because actually it can take some time depending on what sector you're looking at, what your skills are, etc. So we have had a question come through in the chat. James, did you want to ask that, or shall I ask it?
I'm happy to talk out loud.
Great.
So my own background is kind of a CTO, CISO mix, and I guess what risks do you take on as a non-exec, particularly in that sort of CISO space?
Well, inevitably you are signed up to the business as a director with the same responsibilities, and so due diligence is obviously a very large part of you, even considering a role and taking the time out before you accept a role. And obviously some companies are easier to delve into than others. You know, if you've got a PLC, then you can sit and have a good read of their annual report, and that will give you a really good flavour, you know, of what you're committing to. But what we would say is, obviously, you know, your interview is that opportunity for you to ask questions, and we always take the viewpoint that a candidate can say this isn't for me at any point during that process. You know, it's quite different from a normal executive position, or maybe it isn't, but you know, we do understand that, you know, in conversation you might have some red flags about a business that you think actually this isn't going to be for me, but really the onus is on you to do your due diligence, and there is some insurance that a company should be offering you when you become a non-exec as well. But yeah, I mean, there's, like I say, there's lots of really good information out there on the internet about what your responsibilities as a non-exec would be. So yeah, definitely have a good look for that. I'm sure Simon and the others would have a viewpoint about what they considered before they took their roles.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd echo what Naomi's saying, James. I think you've got to be very clear in your mind what your fiduciary responsibilities are as a director. They're very clear, they're laid out, and you've got to know what they are. And you've got to know what they are in different circumstances, as I talked about earlier. For me personally, I would want to talk to the chairman of the board. I want to talk to the auditors, if they have any. I'd want to look at the accounts, as Naomi mentioned. I'd want to talk to the CEO, and I'd want to talk to the CFO. And I'd also want to know, again, I'm obviously a bit biased towards the finance side of things, but I think, you're not going to find having an unhealthy relationship between the CEO and the CFO. You're not going to find a healthy company behind that.
Correct.
So I think that, again, I am biased, but, I want to see a strong finance function. I want to see a strong CFO who's really considered a business partner, who's actually genuinely valued at the business. And you want to see that dynamic really work, and depending on what your skill set is. So again, you might be going in, typically when I go in, I'm going to go in and ask to go on the audit committee, just because that's what I do, right? So you're going to want to be across that. You're going to want to be across the accounts. You're going to want to know if the auditors have had any particular issues, or there are any key risk items, or they've had to qualify the accounts, or whatever it might be. And then you just go from there. And I think, it starts to become about experience as well. You're going on the board because you've got experience. Fundamentally, you've got some experience that you can bring that nobody else can. And that experience comes from years of doing what you do. So if you've got a little voice in your head telling you that there's something that's not quite right, or the dynamic's not working, then listen to it. But again, sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Sorry, Paul, carry on.
No, I was just finishing. I was going to say, I think it's just about, having a real sense of knowing what your role is going on. I think that's something that Simon mentioned, of going into the board. Why do they want you? Make sure that's very clear in your mind. And I think James made the point as well, very clear in your mind. What is it that you're bringing to the table? There'll be something. It might be contacts. It might be your experience. It might, whatever it might be. You might have worked for a competitor, right? As long as you've got the right amount of time between roles, that's all fine. But it's, you've got to be very clear what you're bringing to the table. Then you can be very clear back to the board and to management of that company as to how you can use that, whatever it is, because you don't want there to be a misunderstanding about what they think you're bringing and what you think you can bring. And then you've got to do your due diligence. And I think, just going back to the previous question, I think, as someone once said, the harder you work, the luckier you get. So I think you'll find the vast majority of people will tell you that the non-exec roles that they've got through contacts, as Simon just laid out. Right? I know I did, and Simon does. Doesn't mean that there's not other roles out there, and things like this are an important part of it. And Naomi will obviously have her views from from a recruiting side. But you've got to kind of put yourself out there. You do have to network, and the more effective you are at that, all of a sudden something will come up, and you'll look back and go, "Oh, that was a coincidence," when it wasn't. It was just because you've been out there doing what you're doing.
I think, given the nature of your question, James, certainly from a security and a risk space perspective, any company or industry that is committed to certain regulatory commitments, the relationship with the regulator with that business is absolutely critical as well. I think you will be very quickly, not necessarily pulled into those relationships, but you would certainly be a party to that. And to Paul's point, the relationship between the CFO and the CEO is important. The relationship between the business and the regulator is as important, if not more so, because they can determine the future existence of your business, let alone its direction. And so, sorry, the won't focus on direction, but in terms of your ability to operate as a firm. I also, back to Paul's point around, is there a gut feel element to this? I think if there's any resistance to answers to questions that you have, it then does put the onus on you to ask those questions, and to Naomi's point, to know what questions to ask. Where I would get a level of comfort, again, is to Paul's point, was if they can articulate to me what they see as the value as having a non-exec director, and therefore what is the value of me being that individual for them. If it's well thought out, it's well considered, it's articulated well in terms of what they are looking for from you, stroke this position, would all start giving me lots of confidence and reasonable access to the people and to the detail that you need to ensure that you're not walking into a forest fire. Really is probably, for me, is critical, because I have heard, and I've seen that previously with Naomi, you know more than this than I do, but when I've hired non-execs in the past, they typically have maybe anything from 3 to 5 non-exec director roles, depending on how many board meetings a year, whatever their commitment might be. And several in the past have said to me, actually, I was taken on just to absorb some of the risk that this business had, and it was to almost share the responsibility of the risk and the issues that we had. And that, to them, when they were saying it, felt completely wrong. That's not the purpose of this. That it's not the purpose of a non-exec director role.
Yeah, I've heard that as particularly in the security and risk sort of area of expertise. Thank you all for your answers.
It's interesting, actually, just specifically in a sort of high risk, very high profile area that you're talking about. I think the other thing, and we're not really talking about it here, I don't know whether it's considered off topic, but you've got the whole INED space as well. So where you're independent, you're not just a non-exec, but you're independent as well. What typically is going to happen if there's an issue with a regulator or with somebody is that they will look to the INEDs and maybe NEDs, depending on how it goes, they'll be the guys they approach, because they're the ones who are supposed to have that, obviously it's in the name, but they're supposed to have that independence. Both NEDs to a degree, and certainly the INEDs have got to have that independence. So other things you have to think about are the financial rewards. Like if you're going in as an INED, then you probably shouldn't be getting equity or options as part of your remuneration, because people will argue that you're not independent. There's a real perception point in this as well. It's no good just going in and being independent or being a non-exec. You've got to be seen to be doing that as well. If you look at Toshiba as an example, they appointed their first non-Japanese person to their board in 80 years in their existence about 18 months ago. He's a guy that I've worked with for quite a few years, and he's gone in there specifically because he has restructuring experience, because he was the guy who did Lehman Brothers in Asia, and he's gone in there specifically. And if you just Google Toshiba, you will see that it's the INEDs that have got together over there and formed an independent group that are working with the government to work through Toshiba's issues. So particularly, I would say in that kind of security and risk space, you should have one eye on. Again, I always go in glass half empty. It's my job. The CEO is the guy with his eyes up in the sky. It's the CFO's job to keep his feet on the ground while he's doing it. So you always plan for the worst, expect the best, and hope for whatever way around it is, hope for the best and expect the worst, whatever. But I think it's things like that and thinking through. And I think James's point is a really crucial one. If you get any sense of defensiveness or evasiveness, or there's not transparency, or you get a sense that you're not wanted by certain pockets, you've just got to get to the bottom of it. Be very rational, don't take it personally, and just work out why. There might be a very valid reason and you can work through it. It might be a red flag that means that you step away from it.
All good. All I would say on top of that is, don't walk into any situation expecting it to be perfect. I mean, the reason you're there is you're going to add value and contacts, but sometimes you're there to actually help lubricate situations and make conversations, relationships happen. So a little bit, if it's dangerous and it smells bad, it pretty is. But a little bit of grit, a bit of we don't quite know how to sort these things out, and sometimes we have diverging rules. We're slightly dysfunctional as a board sometimes. That to me is understandably why a non-exec with experience and authority can be the right person to make that work.
I'm certainly comfortable as that agent of change. I'm less comfortable as the agent of target practice.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. You're already thinking the right way, James. That's the kind of, that's how
I would agree.
That's
yeah,
sounds like.
We have had another question in the chat for you all. So when the role is advertised, will consider first-time NEDs, how often, generally speaking, is it actually filled by a first-time NED?
I think Naomi better answer that one.
So I shouldn't. I think if anybody was hiring themselves a non-exec, they would probably lean towards someone who has been a non-exec before. So that does seem like it's very unfair. We like to really support first-time non-execs, and we never ever, but very rarely do we put on a role spec that we put together, you must have been a non-exec before. We might ask for an exec or a non-exec experience. I think what you have to remember is if you've got a particularly useful, I'm going to say probably not a finance director, but if you've got a skill that is out of the ordinary, perhaps that cyber piece, perhaps that digital piece, perhaps, some of the new and upcoming parts of business that everybody's now sort of taking a look at, that is possibly going to get you a step in the right direction. But the way to get the experience, if you haven't been a non-exec before, is to perhaps look at the charity sector or a non-profit sector and get that board experience in place. That's what everyone will advise you that's working in the non-exec world, just to get a little bit of experience, and then that will just give you that step advantage. I mean, James mentioned the people with 4 and 5 roles. They would not be our candidates. I don't care what their background would be. We don't approve of people who are overboarded in any way at all, because inevitably when things like pandemic hits, there's no way that anyone can manage the chaos that would have been surrounded a boardroom in that situation. And that was extreme, but portfolio non-execs can be equally no value add to the people who perhaps have never been a non-exec before. So pick your roles, be sensible. If you can have a look at who the other board members are, that will give you a feel. And like I say, you've just got to put your best foot forward and give it a try. If you don't get it, don't think it's because you're not capable, as Simon says. Just there might have been someone who's slightly edged forward for whatever reason than you on the day. The more you give a try at, the better the chances are of getting that first one. But it really does fall back on that network as a backup, because the recommendation is probably going to get you a bit further. But no harm in having a look. You've got to get your nose out there and see what's out there, really.
So that leads really nicely, actually, into another question that we did have submitted today, about what you would recommend for a first-time NED. So obviously networking, as you've all said already, and if you haven't got any kind of experience, get somewhere, so that you can start building up that expertise, so that when you do then apply for an NED role, you've got some experience behind you that you can show that you have been working towards that kind of role. Is there anything else that you could do if you sorry, my words. Is there anything else that you guys could recommend for someone who will be, as it were, a first-time NED? What else can they do to have success at that?
I would add, sorry, jumping in. The thing I would add, I think you do need boardroom experience. I mean, that's an obvious thing, but I think an awful lot of people who have got great sector experience and may have a great contact book and probably can really help. And in a one-to-one situation, they might be very valuable. But in a boardroom dynamic, whether it's small or large, is quite different. Mm-hmm. And I think if you go into a situation you don't recognise, you won't be at your best. I think actually feeling comfortable around a board table, metaphorically and literally, is really important, because then you can be your best in the room. Don't get the first role, or try and get the first role and dive into a boardroom and try and learn on the job then, because it's hard for it to go well. Do it in a more controlled way, an exec way, and then actually you feel comfortable in that room, then look at the non-exec, would be my advice.
We do have some non-profits that we've worked with who've been very good about the fact that they're not paying you to mentor you as a board member. So there are those possibilities out there. I think, again, that might come back to your network a little bit. We just happened to come around a very forward-thinking company that knew if the skills they wanted, that would give someone that opportunity. The lady happened to be, come with a legal background. And obviously you don't always get that boardroom opportunity as perhaps you would do as another exec role. So there are opportunities out there. There are huge amounts of trustee and, you know, non-profit opportunities. And I would just say, you know, have a good look through them, but make sure that if you do choose to go for one and someone's like rubbing their hands with me because you're bringing them some skills they don't have, just to make sure it's really what your passion is, or your, you know, that you really want to be with them, because inevitably you want to be at least 3 years in a role. It looks good on your CV. You don't, like anything, you don't want to be jumping around too much. And also you don't want to just miss out on that next role and think, I shouldn't have taken this one because now here's the one that I would have really liked. So it's just a bit about getting the balance right, really.
I think something else, if you just looking for that kind of exposure to the formality of that, like the governor of a school. So I would never for a second suggest that, you know, being a governor on a school is similar to sitting on a, you know, PLC or a larger private company. But if you've had no experience of kind of being in a room with people with different motives and different agendas and different priorities, if you've never had the experience of you know, having a, you know, being given formal responsibility for something and working through, you know, the actual formalities of a governance process, it's not a bad place to start. I do it, and there are some definite overlaps when it comes to the way that the governance is handled with what you'll find on a board. So kind of to Naomi's point and to Simon's point, if you really have had no experience whatsoever of a board environment, that's not the worst place you could. You'd certainly better off having done that than having done nothing. But, you know, as I said, I certainly wouldn't put it out there as being the same. But there are some things there that you could take across, and they're crying out for school governance.
Yeah, and it's also exceptionally rewarding because it changes the dynamic when there is little to no financial benefit for you, that it plays to your passion. You know, I cite an example here close to home. My mother's on the board of directors for the RNLI, right? Unpaid, purely out of passion, purely because of sort of family history. And it's actually turned into something she'll probably do all the time that she's capable of operating at that level. And so, but the experience and the exposure and the network she's gained off the back of that is quite exceptional. So, you know, there could well be things. It's, you know, I've got young children that are at school, and I just haven't got the time to commit to at the moment, but I've committed at some point that I'd like to be one of the governors and to work on that, because that's something that's personal to me. So you do have, that's a nice window of opportunity to, one, gain some experience, but also for an organisation that isn't financially in a position to reward you, but you can gather that experience as well. We did some work 2 years ago on the security side for Save the Children, and actually there was the opportunity there as well, and that was fascinating. But I do apologise, I'm dropping for another call, so we'll leave you to it. But thank you for everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, James. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye now. Have a good day.
Bye. Are the rest of you all right still for time?
I've got another one at 1, to be honest. I thought, so I've got a few more minutes. I can put it back a couple already, I'm afraid.
That's okay. So just broadly speaking, what generally would you say the first 30, 60, 90 days of an agreement could look like? Is it different every time depending on the company, or are there some things that are generally the same?
Paul, do you want to go first? Up to you.
I think for me, it's kind of what I've said. I think it's really confirming that what you thought you were getting into when you did your due diligence before taking the role is what you got into. You know, and letting that honeymoon period kind of wear off and actually get into the nitty gritty, get through the first couple of meetings, and, you know, really start to form that definite view that, you know, this is a company that you want to be involved with, and it's the reasons that you took the job in a nutshell, I would say. And vice versa, you know, to know that what you're supposed to be bringing to the table, you can add the value that they want you to.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think you also do And, you know, 30, 60, 90 days, there's only probably 3 board meetings, and the stuff in between is actually you're building relationships. It does take time, you know, it can all be good. You can dance around your handbags and get, you know, and all that stuff. You can get the role, but it takes time for it to calm down. So you feel you know them well enough to actually be quite forthright, and they really open up with you. You know, assuming you're right, Paul's right. You know, you kick the tires from the inside, and it is what you think it is. But that takes time. I mean, I think 90 days is not that long. After that, though, if you feel like you're in a good position, they trust you, you talk well to each other, then I think you can start to influence things.
I do actually have a little one PowerPoint slide that talks a little bit about induction and what that should look like. Now, I'm going to say not every company is very good at doing induction when it comes to onboarding their non-execs, but if you're just thinking about looking at past board meeting papers, perhaps meeting with the chair, perhaps meeting with some of the other non-execs one-on-one before you even get to your first meeting, they're not bad things to have in mind. And that might give you a little bit of a highlight as to how well that company is going to, you know, take you into their business and look after you a little bit. And so, you know, I'm very willing to share that with everybody on the call today. It's a very simple graphic really about what it might look like, but again, there's always lots of information out there in terms of on the internet, and I would say have a look at it, make sure they're coming, you know, you'll get some good feeling for the business if they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to set up these meetings for you in advance of the first meeting or in your within your first 3 meetings. Simon's going to sit there and tell me it happened to him. But we always try and encourage our clients to think about that in terms of onboarding properly.
I'm going to have to shoot off, I'm afraid.
That's absolutely fine.
May I make one last comment, if that's all right?
Absolutely, go for it.
And I hope Paul agrees, but I'll go and Paul can disagree then. All I'd say is, it's great. I love doing what I do as non-exec. I don't think it's for everyone. I think actually some people find going from exec to non-exec quite difficult. So actually sort of going in, doing something and going out again is quite, if you spent many years hands-on with the business, it feels very odd then letting go quickly. And I know 1 or 2 people who haven't adjusted to it, and they've tried it, it didn't work. They went back to the executive side because they felt they wanted to be involved all the time. But I personally, I love it. It suits me and my world and the way my brain works. So I do encourage people, and good luck to everyone with it.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's a massive change in mindset, and you've got to be prepared for that, which is why I think the previous experience of any kind of setting, whether it's a non-profit school, whatever it might be, I think is really useful, because you know you will have to change that mindset, and that will put you in good stead for when you go into the more complicated roles.
Absolutely right. I'm going to have to wait. So lovely to see you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your time, Simon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic. If you are happy, Paul and Naomi, I will probably leave us there, because we are on time now, and I know quite a few people are needing to drop off as well. So I feel like I'm going to say we should revisit this, because there are still so many questions to ask and so many things to know. But I just want to say thank you so much, Paul and Naomi and Simon and James, obviously, for joining us today and giving us your thoughts. It's been really valuable for us. And thank you to everybody who's joined us today as well. We will make sure we get the recording emailed out, and that slide from Naomi as well, we'll make sure we get that emailed to you as well, so that everybody's got that.
And we have a link to register with us on our website, so any roles that we've got coming through, there's no cost involved to be a part of our network, so please, we're very welcome to have new candidates sign up with us, and if someone would like a chat one-on-one, I'm very happy to do that as well.
Excellent, thank you so much. Yeah, also we'd love your feedback on today's event. If you'd like to see more of these other panelists, you know, anything like that, please do let myself, Jade or Barry know. And all that's left for me to say now is have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.